3, 4, 5-ish people here, so we're gonna get started. Well, Aaron's standing.
I'll take the ish.
You're the ish, okay. Welcome to the Salt Lake City RDA meeting today, whatever today is, March 26th maybe. We will begin with general comments to the board. Oh, and I have one. It's always exciting. Thank you. As just a quick housekeeping item, we have everybody who wants to speak to the RDA board has 2 minutes. We ask that, just be as respectful as possible when saying your things to us. That said, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Paul Johnson, would you like to join us?
Good afternoon. I'm here along with other board members of the Central Ninth Community Council. Today you will be discussing the 900 South Streetscape improvements. We would like to thank board members for the time they've given in meeting with our board, hearing us out, and engaging in discussion regarding this project. We're very pleased with the numbers you'll be reviewing today, particularly with the much lower than anticipated annual maintenance. Revenue from proposed parking meters would likely more than offset the projected cost, let alone the increased taxes generated by the higher density housing developments and new local businesses which have come and continue to come into the Central Ninth neighborhood. We hope you'll agree with our view that the time is now to proceed, as the longer we wait, the more expensive this project becomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I don't have any other cards. Is there anyone else that, please step on up?
Good afternoon.
Hi, can you just tell us your name, please?
Yeah, my name's Tim Funk. I'm here for Crossroads Urban Center. We're concerned about your plans for Block 67. Not the plan itself. There are things in the plan that could change, and we're aware of that. What we're really concerned about is the Jackson apartments that are on the southwest corner. There are 80 units of project-based housing there, meaning that people pay 30% of their income for those units. People are typically living on $1,000 or less a month. If those units are there for sale, it's not widely known that the owner of the property is trying to sell it, but he is trying to sell it at a time when his land is worth more because there's proposed development on the rest of the block. We also are concerned about the housing on the block south of it that belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church, and they are planning with Woodbury Company to expand or to probably tear down the existing housing and to put in new, probably more expensive apartments or condominiums. That amounts to 150 units of low-income housing in 2 blocks that are in jeopardy. They will be in jeopardy. You will be seeing the planning proposals on that. And you need to have some kind of a city policy and awareness of how to handle that. We have talked to a couple of you today about that, and there is something that can be done with the Jackson apartments and getting the Department of Housing and Urban Development to help move those units from that, if it's sold, and those units don't remain Section 8, and they wouldn't at the price it's selling for now, they could be moved to other projects with the help, with the agreement of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So that's a fair warning on those 2 projects. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the board today? I don't see any hands. I do want to say that we do have assisted listening devices. If anyone in the audience needs any assistance hearing the comments or discussion by the board. And you can just raise your hand and one of our staff members will help you out with that. With that said, we are going on to our public hearing. Our first public hearing is the Block 67 Community Reinvestment Area. Would anyone like to speak to this? Nope. Okay,
There's a hand back there.
come on up. Oh. I-
Oh, we just,
And Jeannie, will you say your name for us, please?
Janie Iwamoto. Do you want my address or no? You don't need that. Okay. So we're just here because we've been having these meetings, very good meetings with the city. Thank you very much. And we had some separate meetings with the Ritchie Group and on the development, and have come to, we're moving ahead, and we just want to tell you that we met with our session and trustee, and this is Reverend Brad Kramer at our church too. He's here, and we met with them on details and things like that. And so we're moving ahead, and of course we need to work on details and things, but we appreciate the support you've given us as a city. It's a very, concrete things that have been done for the first time with the city, and we appreciate that very much. So.
I'm Roland Yoshinaga, and I'm with the JCPC, and I've been involved with the groups that your RDA staff has been working with to resolve some of those outstanding issues we've had there. And I think we have, by and large, have a plan to resolve virtually all of those issues. There are details yet to be ironed out, but I think from the community standpoint, the feeling is to move forward. That we do not have large issues left, other than some of the details and how it'll all play out in the end. But we just want to say, I want to say I'm very impressed with your staff and what they've been able to do. They've really brought us all together, and they despite all the temptations and all the other distractions, they've hung in there and won't let go until we resolve these things. So thank you very much.
And I just want to say, too, from JCPC, we represent the churches and the Japanese community, and Judge is here, but he won't come out. I don't know why. He has a hard time hearing, but he's really strong. But I think there's still lingering feelings about being the back end and all these things that have happened, but we're hoping through this process that we start a new beginning, and through with the city and hopefully the county, too, and everyone aboard. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Chair Fowler, members of the RDA board, my name is Samantha Julian. I'm the Deputy Director of the Downtown Alliance for Salt Lake City. We just wanted to say a couple words about the project and its impact and effect in the area potentially. We'd like to acknowledge the work of the RDA board and the RDA staff. We know this has been a lot of complications and hurdles, but it's done a really great job, so we wanted to acknowledge that. We also wanted to acknowledge the Japanese community for really making an effort to let their voice be heard and to really think about the project and what could it do, because the Japanese community has been a really great part of this project and will be in the future, so we're excited about that. We support the West Quarter's preferred development scenario. It's an innovative mixed-use project, expands the residential project. We have great residential products, but theirs is going to be even more exciting. It will enhance the city's walkability with commercial activation and a mid-block walkway, which we all love. Who doesn't love mid-block walkway? And below-grade parking, another thing we love, yes? Developers' preferred development project, fully executed, brings higher tax revenue to the city, strengthens the 200 South Corridor, builds assets that Salt Lake City needs for anticipated growth. We believe the development brings attention to the historic Japantown. It also improves connectivity between Vivint, Salt Palace, Gateway, and the downtown sports and entertainment district that it could be. It boosts the nighttime economy and expands the tax base and encourages economic development, additional economic development. So just wanted to share that with you, and thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Stephanie. Samantha, sorry. Is there anybody else? Okay. Do we need a motion to close the public hearing?
You might want to wait until
Till after we discuss? Yeah, let's do that.
extend the public hearing, but it's up to you.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Madam Chair, I move we close the public hearing.
I have a motion by Board Member Mendenhall, a second by Board Member Luke. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we will close the public hearing on the Block 67 Community Reinvestment Area and move on to RDA business. So with that, I look for a motion to approve the meeting minutes of Tuesday, February 12th. So moved. I have a motion by Vice Chair Wharton and a second by Board Member Johnston. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, those minutes are approved. Next, well, let's talk about Block 67, shall we? Step on up, Danny and team. We have Danny Walls, Jill Wilkerson-Smith, Corinne Piazza. Is Benj going to join us? Yep. And Allison.
I'll share with you.
Hi. Hi. How, you take it away, however you want to start. Allison, do you want to give us some background?
You. I will not, but thank you anyway. No, I was just going to suggest that the RDA has its usual presentation ready, and so that'll be an opportunity for board members to refresh their memories on the details of this large and complex plan. And then we do have a number of policy questions that you may or may not wish to entertain later.
Okay, go for it, Dan.
Okay. First off, I'd like to start by kind of echoing what everyone has said prior, of thanking everyone who's been involved in this, obviously the patience of the developers as well as the involvement of the Japanese American community, which has been vital to making sure that we're doing this project the right way. Also, I'd like to thank staff. Jill and Corinne have put in a tremendous amount of time in this, as well as Allison on the council staff, who has been really patient with us as well as we have sorted through these issues and communicated information back and forth. And you'll also hear from Benj Becker from Zions today as part of our presentation. So we have just a real quick set of slides we want to run through, just because this has been a process. It's been quite a while to get to where we're at right now. And so we felt it was important to, one, put in context what is being requested of the board today in terms of approval of the plan, as well as just provide a little background on how we got here. So with that, I will turn it over to Jill, and she'll start us off.
Thank you very much. So this presentation will consist of 3 parts. The first is just an overview of the proposed project, which I will give. Then Corinne will give you an update on the CRA plan. And then Benj Becker from Zions Public Finance will discuss the financial benefit analysis so that you understand the benefits that this project will bring. So a little bit about the proposed project. As you know, this is called the West Quarter. It's between the Vivint Smart Home Arena and the Salt Palace. They intend to build a large mixed-use project that will be kind of an LA Live sort of concept. It'll be something that will really complement the Vivint Solar Arena. We'll have jumbo sports screens. It'll have a rooftop bar as part of its hotel. There will be restaurants and shopping on a mid-block street. A little bit about the project elements. This project will be done in 2 phases. The first phase, which is actually in the CRA that we will be talking about today, will contain a residential tower, a hotel, a mid-block street with retail and restaurants, and also part of an underground parking structure. In phase 2, which is on the south side of the block, which is in our existing CBD project area, we will have another commercial tower, residential, the continuation of the mid-block street with retail and restaurants, and the rest of the underground parking structure. Details about phase 1, which is in the proposed CRA. The residential tower will be 240,000 square feet. It will contain 241 market rate units. We'll also have a dual-branded hotel with 200,000 square feet and 272 rooms. We'll have retail on the street at 20,000 square feet. Also, as I mentioned, there will be a rooftop deck that will have a bar. And then there will be an underground parking structure. The majority of the underground parking structure will be built on the south side of the block and not be in the CRA. But the portion that is in the CRA will contain 350 stalls 46 of which will be available to the public. And as you can see in that boundary, that is the boundary of the CRA.
Jill,
Yes.
do you mind if I interrupt real quick?
Jill,
We have
just a
question.
clarifying question.
Sure.
Could you show us, and I know it's been a couple months since I met with Mr. Ritchie and looked at the phase plans, but will the underground parking in the two phases be contiguous, or are we talking about two distinctly separate underground parking structures?
They will be contiguous.
Okay, and can you kind of hover maybe with the mouse and the where on the map we're looking
So
at here?
it'll be basically here all the way down to the south end of the block.
Okay,
This is, just to let you know, this is 3rd West, this is 1st South, and this is 2nd West over here.
thank you, Jill.
Okay.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
No problem.
Yeah.
And then
Mr.
I have a question as well. Now, the Japantown improvements, this is in phase 1 as well, correct?
That is something that is under discussion. I think we don't know exactly what the Japantown improvements will be. One of the things that the developer is discussing is grading these two sites that they own adjacent to the parking structure and providing knockout panels to the parking structure.
Okay. So they are discussing that then, making those improvements during
They are
phase one.
discussing making those improvements as part of building the beginning of the parking structure. So the developer is requesting from the RDA that we create the CRA as part of, as a portion of the overlay on the Central Business District project area. So this is currently located in a non-collection part of the CRA. We would pull it out, it would become its own project area, just kind of like Block 7D. The use of the tax increment proceeds would be used to offset the cost of the infrastructure, particularly the parking. And as you know, the county is offering to pay funds to go toward the parking structure. The tax increment would be used to pay back the county for that portion of their investment. The request from the county is that those tax increment dollars be prioritized to pay those improvements back first. So now we'll move on to part 2. Corinne will discuss the Block 67 North CRA plan.
And Jill touched on the boundary a little bit, but just a refresher on why we're on the half block. Basically, the original proposal by the developer was to remove Block 67 from the existing Central Business District, but because the current tax increment collection there was 40%, and he wanted to create a new CRA so that there was a higher tax increment collection. And the south side of that block is already committed to bonds for the Eccles Theater, so we can't move that boundary. So that's why we have the north block at this point. You want to show the map? There you go. So that's the north side. So that's where we are. The developer proposed the half block. So moving on, as far as the benefits for the downtown master plan is per the requirements of 17C, the CRA draft plan that you have looks at, how the project lines up with goals of the downtown master plan. So some of the important ones here are increased density, the incorporation of mid-block walkways, the encouragement of mixed-use development, the creation of a sports and entertainment area, parking for Vivint, Utah Jazz, Salt Palace, and the general area, partnering with Salt Lake County to ensure the long-term viability of convention space at the Salt Palace, and providing access to good jobs. And as far as participation in next steps, if the draft plan is approved by the board, next steps would include the staff begins negotiation of the terms of the interlocal agreements with the city, the county, and the school district. You'll see in the plan there's 7 taxing entities, but there's the big 3 that provide, the biggest amount of increments. So without those 3, it really wouldn't be feasible to move forward. So we would focus on those 3 first. And as far as the next step would be negotiating the tax increment reimbursement with the developer. So this would include terms such as developer responsibility, admin fee, things like that. And you can see on page 14, table 5, there's a breakdown of how the budget would be allotted.
Okay. And so part 3.
Corinne, we're going to interrupt with a
sorry,
couple
go ahead.
questions.
On that.
You didn't think you'd get off that easy, right?
So what position are we in if the other taxing entities don't come on board? What would we do next?
That is one of the questions for the board to address, is to what extent would the city want to continue to participate and or create the project area if we do not get significant participation from the other entities. We suspect that obviously the county is interested in participating. The school district and other entities would be based on those conversations and negotiations. And so the issue would then first and foremost be posed to the developer, that if we were not able to participate and provide a reimbursement amount significant, how does that affect both their level of interest as well as what the level of participation would be from the county as it relates to their $15 million investment. So those conversations would happen as we reach out and discuss that interlocal with those entities.
But those haven't started at all yet?
We have started with the county, obviously, because that was one of the impetus for doing this project area. With the school district, we have not had any official discussions with them, only as to kind of inform them of we are working on this process so that as they read about it in the paper, they knew what we were doing.
Okay, and do you think that the developer has a clear understanding of that this is the direction it would likely go if taxing entities don't come on board?
Yeah, I mean, we've made it clear that we obviously can't speak for the county's terms and conditions as well as the school district.
Okay.
I mean, I guess in considering adopting a resolution, we could put something like that in the resolution, right? Of we don't act unless all other entities act or revisit or do something. Because it would change or potentially change what we would be asked to provide.
Absolutely. The involvement of the entities dictates what their participation is, what the amount of increment is. So you absolutely want to know that prior to entering any of the interlocal agreements, and you can certainly make that a condition of an approval today in terms of finalizing that and approving the plan today based on knowing what that participation would be.
Yeah.
Madam Chair. So one of the things that I really like about this project, and we've been hearing about it for quite a while, is the fact that it really is a project. It's not just an individual development. Unfortunately, I think what we see a lot of in Salt Lake City are just building-specific developments. This is really the first one that we've seen, of this scope since City Creek, which was privately funded. There wasn't a partnership with the city on City Creek. The last time there was a partnership of this size was probably Gateway, and that was almost 25 years ago. The work that has been done with the Japanese community, to this, I want to thank not just the developer, but I also want to thank the Japanese community for being as involved as they were. What has happened to Japantown over the past 60 years, frankly, is an abomination. Salt Lake City is not the only one to blame for this. Salt Lake County also holds some responsibility. This is really the first time, though, that we've seen any sort of an opportunity to acknowledge the history of that area in a way that we have never been able to do before. So I'm excited about this project. There's one hesitation, and Madam Chair, you raised it, and that is what happens if Salt Lake County reneges on its offer to stand behind the $10 million that they've committed to. What happens if other taxing entities, back away or don't come along with us on this? Salt Lake City, I believe, needs to lead out. I'm comfortable and I'm very interested, actually, in passing a resolution today, but I do think it needs to be contingent based on what you were talking about. I think Salt Lake County has committed to backing the $10 million. If Salt Lake County chooses not to do that, of course it's going to have massive implications for us and for the developer. But I don't want Salt Lake City to stand in the way. I don't want Salt Lake City to hold this process up. We have slowed it based on the work that took place with the Japanese community. I'm proud of that decision that we made to try to bring both of those groups together, and I think the outcome is something that's very, very positive for everybody. But I also want to make sure that Salt Lake County doesn't back away from what it's committed to. So, based on your comments, Madam Chair, if we could look for a resolution, if staff can work on a resolution that we could adopt today that has the conditions that will hold the county accountable for the commitments that it made, and also be contingent on the work with the other taxing entities. That is something that I'd like to see, and I'd like us to, if possible, do that today.
Thank you. And Aaron, I'll get to you in just a second. Charlie, for that, I think that we, sort of hearing about some of these concerns that other board members do have staff working on an updated resolution. So just to kind of put the board members on notice of how this plan is going to work today, at least, is I want to make sure we're continuing our discussion. There may be other questions or concerns that other board members have, but Anna has to leave at 3, so we're not going to vote until she gets back. And I think that will actually be during the city council meeting? Is that what we decided?
It depends what time. Depends on the budget. Come on now. It depends.
I don't know how quick it's going to be. So that just so everyone out there knows and all of us know, we'll continue this discussion for the allotted time that we have, and then we'll just kind of put a pin in it for a minute while Anna goes, and then when she comes back, we will consider taking action on whatever resolution we come up with today. So with that, I know that—
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I'll just say from the staff perspective, we'll plan on circulating the draft prior to your guys' taking action in addition to RDA staff and the recorders and the public, just so that it's not, it will be public information, prior to your guys' action on it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen, I appreciate that. So with that, Erin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And that gets to the policy question number 4. I just was hoping that we could maybe work through some of the policy questions, particularly because of policy question 1B, which brings up the realities of evolving pro formas and a deal of this scale. It's not surprising that there's a lot at play and there's some shifting and moving parts. So I am not in any way going to take this chance to criticize evolving pro formas today. But I do want to talk about the financing gap and what we need in the situation of considering something today that's different from when we started the conversation a long time ago, or many months ago anyway, and that, I think, gets to Benj's role at the table. So I would like to raise the policy question 1B around whether or not, and perhaps we could hear from Benj about that, about having Zions study that financing gap for us with the current proposal, particularly as it relates to the parking.
Sure.
I'm informing Benj of what policy question 1B is, so he can.
You want me to read it? Summarize?
I thought about letting him just take a guess at it, but.
Sure, I appreciate the question, and I will
More
please
like
steer.
A,
1A.
which is that the board could request that Zion Public Finance conduct a more in-depth review with the developer to provide better understanding of the nature of the gap and verify construction assumptions.
Sure. And I guess, and you can, if I get off course here, just steer me as appropriate to answer this question. But in the initial look at the gap, we looked at the developer's projected costs for, at the time it was all one project. Now it's been, as you know, separated into 2 phases. The initial gap concerns that were brought up to us were the parking costs. Initially were represented at $66,000 a space. From our market research, we found a number that was moderately to significantly lower than that. After meeting with the developer and the RDA board and the developer's construction team, their number was shaved down a bit, and we agreed that the site has some unique characteristics that allowed us to come up from what we thought our average parking space was. But nonetheless, we still felt that there was a gap there based on what other construction companies had told us from looking at the site. And that's really, for us, where the gap was notable. Again, it is a unique project in that we do not have a lot of underground parking in the Salt Lake Metro, so true comparables are fairly limited. For that purpose, we looked at other markets, Portland, Phoenix, Denver, Las Vegas, quite a few other markets. That was the majority of the gap in terms of where we felt that the costs appropriated for parking were significantly higher than what we thought the market would bear.
Can I follow up on that? So the parking opportunity isn't, or is it part of our public benefits analysis? Because I'm not
It is. The public parking is part of what would be the public benefits analysis.
And when we go down to policy question 5, which talks about the value of some of the public benefits from the project, it doesn't list parking, but a lot of things that take place when parking happens. I'm wondering about, Benj, if you can talk to me about how if there's a prioritization of these values in your analysis process, or let me ask that in one other way to try to be more clear. It's sometimes difficult for us to monetize values like placemaking and walkability and some of the other ones that, and it says in here they're less easily quantifiable. How, in your technical analysis, do these unquantifiable values, or perhaps the value of providing parking, stack up?
Sure. I don't know that there's necessarily a matrix that suggests that placemaking is greater or equal to parking. But the way that we look at it is we look at two ways to figure out essentially two ways if there's a gap. We look at all of the developers' proposed construction costs. We compare those to the market, what the market would support for that construction. We look at the cost of land, assuming this is purely a market play here. All of those costs create some sort of value, whether that's, so let's say it's $1 million. Then we look at what the future market value of this project would be when complete, assuming completion of construction today. We don't look at inflated dollars. And we get to that number by looking at what are achievable market rents for office, for residential, for hotel. And where some of those elements come in place is that when all of that income and the expenses get you a net income, to find your value from that net income, it's applied what is called a capitalization rate to really understand the developer's first year rate of return. And the lower that rate is, the lower the risk associated with the property. So it suggests that it's a desirable location, it is a desirable investment, it might have great placemaking opportunities, it might have great parking. If you're looking at a secondary location or a use type that is less than ideal, or maybe it's a second-tier hotel flag, you would look at a higher capitalization rate. That higher capitalization rate, as applied to that net income, will create lower values on a per square foot basis. So it's a very sensitive, and there's certainly some subjectivity to it on proposed developments, and I will admit that freely, that all of these amenities end up creating a more desirable project situation where we think the amenities have value. Sometimes there's obsolescence with some of the amenities, and you don't see those in comparable other projects. So they don't create value. And it's like putting gold-handled doorknobs in a Motel 6. It costs a lot, but nobody pays for it, right?
I appreciate you unpacking that, and I think what it does is reminds me that as a body, we get to speaking to the subjectivity that is at play. We are human beings, we're an elected body, we change over time, and the subjectivity of this body and which values we prioritize and what kind of public value or assets we can gain from investing in a project changes over time. And so I just wanted to better understand how much that shifting value or that relative value is taken into consideration in your financial analysis. Thank you.
Thanks. I got a couple of questions. Hopefully they have answers. The first one is the delta, the gap in the financing for the parking was related to both first and second phase parking structures. Is that correct? Is that combined or just one or the other?
So originally the project was proposed as one project, and then once it was realized that it's part of the central business district and the CRA could not cover the whole area, it was split. So the costs have not been separately split out into a phase 1, phase 2. Phase 2 is anticipated to be down the road enough that projecting now construction costs is a little bit beyond subjective. So the majority of the public parking all happens in phase 2.
Phase 2.
So phase 1, I think there's 54. What is 54 public spaces in phase 1.
So my next question comes to policy question number 2. Essentially, they dovetail. If something happens, heaven forbid, and phase 2 can't happen or happen in the way it's proposed right now, there seems to be a drop in the public amenity issue, public benefit, right? Does it also mean if they don't do an underground parking structure, for instance, on phase 2 now or in the future, how does the $15 million work at that point? Because it seems like it's shared between both phases. Is that accurate?
The 15 million as it was originally proposed was, as Ben said, when the project was one whole project. As it split, obviously the question became to what extent would that $15 million be invested in the project. Without speaking for the county, I'm not sure that they've necessarily determined that, but it's our understanding that the developer is asking that the $15 million still be invested entirely in phase 1. And then that raises your concern, which is what happens if phase 2 doesn't happen and those stalls are never realized. That is kind of where we left the question with the county in our last discussion as to what extent can we approve a project area and enter into interlocal agreements, and who is going to be responsible if their phase 2 doesn't happen and there's an obligation to repay that $15 million, and who does that fall on? So
we don't know that answer yet?
We know the answer in terms of it's our understanding that Salt Lake City has made it clear that we do not expect to be on the hook for repayment of that $15 million if phase 2 doesn't happen.
But that's our intention. Is that legal anywhere?
That's our intention, and that's what we plan on putting within our legal documents of representing that.
Okay. I mean, I'm hopeful this happens all the way. Don't get me wrong. But there is a significant risk to both the overall project. But if phase 2 doesn't happen, does that decrease the return on investment in phase 1? Frankly, and our economic assumptions are based on phase 2 helping phase 1 increase in value. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Last piece was, I love the fact that there's $10 million set aside for the Japanese community improvements.
1 million.
1 million? All right, 10%, 1 million, excuse me.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in and correct.
Thank you. That's a decimal point. Is there, how detailed are the restrictions on how that can and can't be used geographically or for projects or those kind of things? Or is that pretty flexible?
For the purposes of the plan right now, we have provided it as a line item in the budget. That obviously can be a point of conversation for the board in terms of what amount the board would like to see as part of phase 1 contribute towards those infrastructure improvements. We determined that we felt 10% was an adequate level of commitment. It's the same as what we're committing towards affordable housing, so just like any other benefit we would expect to receive from our project area. We anticipate that the use of that $1 million will come out of the study that we're doing right now, or that we are working to engage a consultant to do for us, which would identify those improvements that we would like to see either within this development in terms of incorporating and integrating the surrounding properties or the Japanese American community priorities, or if they would anticipate infrastructure improvements on 100 South adjacent to the project. So right now, it's really just a line item. We wanted to make sure that that was there for the board to have a conversation on and kind of determine what the priority was and make sure that we were putting that in the budget as what we thought would be a good appropriate use of the tax increment to address that issue.
Okay.
And also, if I may, the item that you brought up earlier about the regrade of the 2 lots, that is an agreement between the Japanese American community and the Ritchie Group, and is separate from what these funds would be used for.
So that's already a part of the funding structure, we're assuming, that regrade?
Well, it wouldn't involve the RDA. It would just be between them as private property owners, and would be part of before they even start construction. They would solidify that.
Okay, I was a little concerned that this 1 million or whatever it turns out to be might be assumed to be used on things like that and not ever actually go to other things outside of this block, say across the street even, or that street itself.
Right, and it should be separate, and again, it'll be between them as private property owners, and not the RDA wouldn't be involved in that piece. It just came from the facilitation process when they were brainstorming on ideas.
I think it's a great move, so thank you.
So the grading is not included with the 10% set aside. That's
No,
completely
that's
separate.
the developer's offering to do
He's
that.
willing to do more above and beyond than the 10%. So, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering, are we going to allow time to the developer to come up and speak so we can ask him a few questions in regards to that?
Sure.
Okay.
I do want to address one thing that, real quick, that Andrew brought up, and that is about the concerns that we have sort of about the county's involvement that have been brought up by other board members, and sort of what legally we can do. We are working, my understanding is we're working on a resolution that addresses some of this, but then also we do have the interlocal agreements. There's an interlocal agreement that would have to come back to the city council as us wearing our council hats, where we can certainly put in certain terms that make us feel comfortable. And there's the interlocal that would have to go to the county, which again, or the city, the school board, excuse me. So there's sort of more ways to make sure that we're minimizing the risk should phase 2, for example, not happen, right? Because we are kind of taking a risk with this 15 million and saying, hopefully everybody follows through and keeps their promises, but there are ways, I think, that we have, not just in the resolution where we're kind of putting people on notice of what our intent is, but putting those in legally binding documents through the interlocal agreements. Is that accurate, Danny?
Yes, that's correct. You would actually execute 3 different interlocals, one between the agency and the school district, one between the agency and the county, and then one between the agency and Salt Lake City. And that would be with essentially the 3 major taxing entities for their participation of tax increment. And then if we sought other entities' participation, those would be separate interlocals as well.
And with that, how do we generally, if Ryan, I see the Ritchie group here, but if Ryan wants to come up to the table and maybe answer a couple of board member questions, if he doesn't mind. You're heavenly. I need to get you a coaster.
Hello.
Welcome to the table, Ryan.
Thank you.
James, did you have a question to
I
start
know
out?
we're not talking about phase 2, but phase 2 was brought up, and I guess my question is what are the guarantees as the developer of this property that phase 2 is actually going to happen?
Yeah, maybe I could step back and answer some of the questions that have been evolving so far. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And I'll hit that one really quick. So when the project was one project, we're going to do the whole thing, then we put forward the $1 million and said we'll contribute $1 million towards the Japanese American community improvements along, and we were really trying to improve Japantown Street and stuff along there. So I think there was a comment from, Councilman Andrew asked about that. The intent is to make sure it stays within this working group that's been created by the RDA, so we can make sure that that's what gets impacted, geographically located right to there. We actually put forward several measures to demonstrate what types of improvements that we would love to see there. And I know the response from both churches was very positive. There's some really cool stuff we put forward, impressive images, some line work that we've talked about doing in First South that would improve the right-of-way from the street line. When I say line improvements, I'm talking about the right-of-way improvements, looking at your paving patterns. That would be very different from what Salt Lake City has ever done before, but we'd create a specific area. This is what I'm pushing, not what Corinne's pushing yet, but we got to go through the process for that. But we have some great ideas that are coming out of that process that we're excited about. But I want to remind everybody that the $1 million we offered was for our participation in the whole project. So that was phase 1, phase 2 at the time. As we pare it back now to a much smaller phase, to put $1 million coming into this right now would be very, very problematic. And the $250,000 that we're spending $250,000 to improve the parking lots, and that was included as part of our $1 million. So what we were hoping to do was to pare that out and say we'll put $250,000 to phase 1 and have another $750,000. If we can talk about that one as we go through this one, because we are committed to the $1 million, but we do want to see phase 2 come through this as well. We don't want to put $1 million into phase 1, then have problems on phase 2 getting the economic arrangement worked out with the city on the reimbursement agreements. Does that make sense? So our full package was for the $1 million. We'd like to see that come through in phase 1 and phase 2. And we were looking at doing, and the reason the improvements that we're talking about, the $250,000, the reason that's improvement, the reason that's a significant amount of money, And the reason why it should be included in the improvements, it's not just the improvements to the parking lot. We're not just, donating improvements. The grading that occurs, do you have a slide of that by chance that shows the improvements to the Japanese parking lots?
It's okay.
Okay.
We don't have a ton of time.
I'm sorry. I'll
right?
speak through it real
So-
quick. But the improvements to that are to integrate it into the project. That's the purpose of that. So it is actually one of the improvements. It makes it so that when it's going to be the activation, potential to bring it along First South and bring it into the project, make it part of the West Quarter project. So that's an important part. To your point, the guarantees on the I want to keep one point also. There's 10 plus million of increment in phase one that gets created over the 20-year period of time. So the 15 million that comes in, there's 2/3 that will be taken care of by the tax increment. I believe I've had lots of conversations with Benj. I'm very confident that the numbers were right in that same ballpark about creating about almost a $10 million increment in there. The last 5, importantly, is a personal guarantee that we are on the hook for as the developers. That includes Kevin Garn and me and my brother Paul. So there's a personal guarantee attached to that. So from Danny's comments, the city should never have any concern of that because that last $5 million is personal guarantee by us. There'll be a timeline to that. Now to the phase 2. Everybody wants to know how phase 2 is going to happen. Okay, the reason phase 2 is going to happen, probably there's 3 critical items I think that need to be. Me and Paul have signed on for a 99-year ground lease. And the way that ground lease works is every building that gets built, we have a portion of that ground lease comes off of the main ground lease, we call the master ground lease, and goes to the level of the project. So phase 1 gets 2 projects. So there'll be 35% of the master ground lease gets a portion to phase 1. That still leaves 65% of that ground lease that we're on the hook for 99 years. I will outlive that guarantee. I won't outlive that guarantee. Hope I do, but I won't outlive that guarantee. Okay, but that's motivating. That's extremely motivating to say this has to continue to move forward. In addition to that, the way that ground lease was prepared is we can't just take that last 65% and dump it into one project. And let's say we just built out Block C and said, well, the rest is, we don't care anymore because our personal guarantee is gone. It is by our covenants with our landlord, it's being apportioned individually throughout all the projects. So the landlord wants the exact same thing. He doesn't want to see a partially done block. So the way that our ground lease was structured was to make sure that it gets apportioned to individual blocks, if that makes sense. So that ensures, it's also important to note that the public benefit of the garage will be completed upon the very first building of the second phase because the garage is contiguous and it supports all of the improvements in the second phase. So you have 4 buildings atop a parking garage that will be completed the very first thing. We talk about sequencing and construction. And when you sequence construction, you're going to build the parking garage first and start building your buildings next. And building C will necessitate building the entirety of the garage. So there's your public benefit. As soon as we build Block C, the whole garage is now completed. So that's number 1. Number 3, last one. Sorry about this, James. Last one. The CBD expires in 2040. Okay? Since this change has happened where we went from a 75% potential to a 40%, I want you to understand the motivation is to get phase 2 into service as quickly as possible so we can maximize that benefit from the CBD. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just want to make it clear that in order for the parking structure to be built, you have to build building C, which will be the first one in phase 2, right?
That's correct. Yep.
May I clarify? I think there's confusion about which million we were talking about. So you were talking about the million that the Ritchie Group put on the table, and then when we were discussing your question, that was a million from the tax increment that would be set aside. So those are 2 different things. So that
helps me.
That's okay. The lot regrade would be $250,000 out of his million, and then the set aside for the tax increment would go to all the improvements that we're working on with the group now and hiring the consultant to help design.
Perfect.
So, Madam Chair, so $250,000 you identified for the regrading of that million you've committed. Is the intention that your million comes in phases equally done or based on your revenue generation from the 2 phases?
No, the $250,000 is going to be spent up front to improve that parking lot, and then the other $750,000 comes in phase 2, and we'll work that out in the next phase. Yep.
Okay. Do you have any incentive within the phase 2, what you're looking at, or depends on everything
We do it
else?
up front.
Okay.
We just do it. When phase 2 starts, we'll put it, we are anxious and interested in getting Japantown, the Renaissance of Japantown, something we're very interested in.
So the second question for the RDA then is if you have a 1% being set aside through revenue generation throughout the tax increment period, 20 years. Is there a belief that that'll be done more upfront, front-loaded through some mechanism to go with Ritchie Group to leverage all that funds together potentially for the big project? Is that the idea, or
I think
are
it
we
would
not quite
depend
sure
on
yet?
how we would need to spend it. I mean, by nature, increment rolls in slowly at first and then builds up. If there were some infrastructure improvements that were identified early on as part of this study that we wanted to look at potentially either bonding for or working with the city to do as part of a bond, then that could be something we could structure and look at doing that earlier on in the project area life so that we're not waiting for the increment to actually come online.
Okay, thanks.
Is it quick? And who's it to? Yeah.
And maybe with Ryan at the table, I'm wondering about, in looking down the road at the phase 2 of a lot of the public benefit, and the economic evaluations we've been hearing about the probable downturn to whatever degree, maybe starting at the end of this year, who knows when, long overdue, historically speaking, right?
Right.
How are those probabilities of, or likelihoods in the economy calculated in, or taken into consideration in your pro forma?
I mean, they have to be, right? They have to be. So the benefit we have, what we're excited about now is that if there is a downturn coming, we have our financing is in place right now. We've signed we signed our loan application last week, and our timing, I think it's also important everybody understands, is that we are planning right now. We're inserting a little bit of faith in this process here and believing this is going to materialize at the same time. But we have made the loan app, and we have 60 days to close that loan. That would be the middle of May. So we've put in for a site disturbance permit with the city on March 5th. And we are expecting through that process to have our permit for site disturbance. Site disturbance allows you to start all your grading process by the end of April. So what I'm sorry, I'm answering your question in a roundabout way. Phase 1 will be built regardless of that process. And so if there is a downturn, of course we have to anticipate and contemplate that. But what does help us is the fact we're also an opportunity zone. That's something that I can't underestimate. Or overestimate how important that is going to be for us. But we will always calculate if the market's there. If lenders aren't lending, it's pretty impossible to build a building. But if lenders are lending, then we are extremely motivated for the 3 reasons I told you to put every building we can into service as quickly as possible.
I appreciate the opportunity zone overlay, and not for this meeting, but I'd love to better understand, maybe from the group or any of you, in the future, in the short-term future, what capacity of downturn, hypothetically speaking, this project has considered, and what timeline delay different proportions of a downturn might look like for us, or for you, for
Right.
phase 2, and for the public benefit implementation.
Right.
Another time.
Thank you. I don't doubt this will be the last time that we see you in front of us, Mr. Ritchie. And I don't know, we have to move on to the next agenda item, but I do want to say that, Mr. Ritchie and I have had a lot of conversations over the last year regarding this project, and it has evolved a lot. And I told you this the other day, but I want to say it again publicly, that I really appreciate the way that you have really listened to my concerns, to concerns I've heard from other board members, and worked through those concerns and really have tried to address them. And that's not just with our Japanese American community, but with other areas within your project that I think you changed, because I very much said, I don't understand why you're not doing this. And you said, okay, I guess we should look at how we're going to do that. And you own the land essentially, and you could do whatever you want. And you've really taken a big step in trying to create something new and different. And we talked about the fact that you're creating an awesome full-service hotel and some boutique hotels. I'm fortunate enough to get to travel all over the country, and it's always fun to see new and exciting hotels that we get to stay in. And I think that you're doing some of those things and creating more walkability with the mid-block walkway. And you know how much I love rooftops, and especially if there's a bar attached to it. So no, you've really taken this process and learned from it. I think
absolutely.
We've sort of learned the RDA together, and I appreciate all of the work that you've done to address our concerns and to understand our process as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for working with our Japanese American community. But thank you to the RDA staff who said, hey, we better do something to to make the board happier about how this process is going to go. And I know, Corinne, you and Jill, you guys have put in so much hard work and so much time in a creative new process that had never been done before to really start to address our community as a whole. So I want to thank everybody in the room that continued to come and share their comments with us, the hard work of our RDA staff, and Ryan and your people for really wanting to create something good that's beneficial for our entire community. So thank you, really, to all of you for kind of going out on a limb and doing something different. So
Thank you,
with
Madam
that,
Chair. Thank you. Been a great process.
well, you don't have to say it's been a great process. I don't know about that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next item, which is equally as exciting.
Yes.
The RDA budget amendment number 4 for fiscal year 2018-2019. I think we found a couple pennies somewhere that need to go.
Just a few, yes.
So, Danny?
My loan up here, I guess?
Ben is on his way.
Okay. I will get started, and I anticipate Ben is coming. While Ben is setting up and coming to the table, I'd like to, again, just start by thanking staff, especially the work of Callie Ruiz, our accountant in the RDA, as well as Mike Burns, our RDA financial analyst, as well as the rest of budget and finance staff. They have done a tremendous amount of work to get us to a point where we could present this information to you. There's been a lot of understanding of numbers. There's been a lot of history behind these numbers, and there's been a lot of just trying to get those amounts finalized so that we feel that we can speak to them today. And then also RDA staff as a whole, we did a lot of work in terms of determining what we thought were the needs for our projects as well as our project areas, and coming together in terms of identifying how we thought was the best use of these funds. So we are happy to present this in any way that the board wishes. We've submitted our information. Council staff has provided a list of questions that we assume you have the answers to that we submitted. And so we can go through the budget per fund and per line item, or if you like, we can just kind of jump right into what those questions are and identify the issues and the projects as we go along.
We're going to do something real quick, and that's just take a quick 5-minute break.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yep, you're welcome, because everyone's paying attention to what they got right now, so I want to give them a chance to look over that before we talk about $37 million.
Sorry, I'm in the way. Just push me
I got one in and one left, so that doesn't help me.
I was eating a caramel apple.
No Triscuits?
I had all sections.
It's a twofer.
Vice mayor position we could run for?
Someone was asking. That's what I'm trying to figure out. You'll see it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. We are going to reconvene the RDA board meeting, and hopefully my fellow board members are ready to talk money.
I'm always ready.
Okay. Danny, why don't you start over a little bit? I don't think
Sure.
anyone was listening to you.
Andrew has eyes on. Appreciate that. We're happy to go through in any level of detail. I just wanted to provide a little bit background that the amount of this budget amendment is fairly significant. And the reason for that is when you take into account what the sources are of the funds, it's a combination of $7 million that was still remaining from the original allocation for the homeless resource centers, as well as a significant amount of money within the RDA fund balance. And that fund balance, while it also reflects just the general collection of funds over time in terms of unspent project area allocations or cost savings, it also was comprised of a significant amount of money that was initially allocated towards projects and was never really formally appropriated to those projects. And so the reason this is important is because it fed into what we are proposing for the uses of the $37 million, that it was a breakdown of priorities for us as we looked at what we really wanted to accomplish with these funds. And first and foremost, the priority was for obligations of the agency. And that is everything from contracts and reimbursement payments, as well as obligations that we have as a property owner to our own assets. And then also project requirements that either by design or default, we are obligated to meet, and we wanted to make sure we had those funds for them. The second priority for us was the appropriation, and by that I mean the formal appropriation of projects that we as an agency and staff always anticipated doing, or at one time or another funds were set aside, budgeted for a project, but were never really formally appropriated by the board. And the most significant of this is the Station Center and the 900 South improvements. And so that's a combination of allocation of funds that were there, that were sitting in fund balance, and also takes into account some of the increases in costs for those projects, which is a significant issue that we'll talk about later as well. Our third priority was continuation and support of our programs, primarily the revolving loan fund. Significant amount of the fund balance was just either payoffs of loans or amounts that were sitting in our revolving loan fund that we obviously just want to make sure are available to go back out and lend. The other was our NOFA, doing another allocation of housing through the NOFA program. That is one that we hope the board will support. And then our fourth priority was looking at what some of the new projects could be within project areas, ones that we've heard from the board or the administration in terms of priorities within our project areas, or ideas of what we would like to come up with to further complete some of these projects. So that was kind of how we broke down our priorities and how we would use the funds and how we would allocate them. And we feel that we came up with a pretty good equitable balance of projects that spreads the money throughout the project areas, tries to identify the goals, take into consideration some of the board priorities that we have heard, and sprinkle in a few new projects that we want to accomplish as we move forward. And so that's essentially where we're at. As I said, we have provided answers to council staff's questions. We're happy to go through those in more detail. To the extent that the board wishes, we are happy to go through our staff memo and talk about each project and present them line item by line item, and also give a description of how those sources came into play. It's really just a matter of how you would like us to proceed and to what level of detail the board would like. Okay.
So one thing I want to start out with is that to clarify, or to just kind of hit a little bit further the nail on the head, is you did this with the idea that many of these projects were projects that had already been sort of in the pipeline somewhere, but didn't maybe have the funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, your biggest line items between Station Center and 900 South are projects that have been in the pipeline for a long time, and obviously now as we make the determination of how to proceed in those projects, it's contingent on getting that funding before we really take any further steps.
Okay, so it's certainly something that the past boards had talked about and said this is important to us, and now you've kind of said, well, we have this money, let's put this to where past boards or this particular board has said this is important to us.
Correct.
Okay. With that, you take it away, board members.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Danny and Ben. Of course, Ben's got some great policy questions here. And I want to ask you specifically about the bond-eligible catalytic project ideas for State Street and 9 Line.
Yes, that's a great question. We as staff have not identified any bond-eligible projects. Obviously, I will admit that part of that is simply that until we actually have the interlocals and a project area established by that and know what the participation is of the entities, it's hard to identify and determine to what extent we could actually go out and bond.
Do you have a status update woven into that?
We have a status update. I can give that now, or we can discuss that later in our project area creation.
We'll wait.
So if that's all right. And then the other is simply just we have not sat down and really prioritized kind of taking that project area plan and laying it out in terms of what we would like to see that happen as part of action steps and projects and prioritize those. So that is something that is on our list to do and return to the board, that as we take that next step with the project area to see if there are some projects that we feel make sense to bond up front and or apply for other funding that would help kickstart those.
Okay, and I want to throw out there that I think this board has been pretty excited about contemplating those possibilities, as we've seen in the past, where project areas didn't pick up as fast as we think that they could have, perhaps with some stimulant at the beginning of the project area. So if you get to the point where your staff is looking to identify some of those projects for the board to consider and you don't have the capacity, I would love to have a conversation about whether or not we can get consultants involved, or we can get some kind of design charrettes at a national level, or whatever ideas there may be to bring in that kind of idea, time and capacity. I want to see these catalytic project proposals, but I also understand that you're running staff with a lot of current projects, and this is something new that we're asking you to do. So I want to make it possible for you.
We can report back on that, yes.
Danny, did you have another question?
Yeah, but I'll weave them in. There's probably other questions.
I have two questions regarding streets. One is in the Greenery District for 400 West and/or 500 West, and how we think, and if we've contemplated this, how the $86 million street bond and/or sales tax revenue would affect this $1.725 million over to the 400 West, 500 West?
That's a good question, because that is one that is partly the reason why we have not identified a specific project for those funds, as much as trying to understand exactly what I think Ben did a great job of providing in his staff report, which is really taking a look at what the available funds are, what are some other available sources of funds, either from bonding or private investment, and where we essentially could get the biggest bang for our bucks. That 1.7 essentially was always sitting in the general fund, not the general fund, the fund balance for Granary. It was always somewhat earmarked to do 400 West at some point. And then the conversation kind of took a higher priority as the developers doing industry have come in and reached out about trying to do infrastructure improvements surrounding their project. And so really, I think what we need to do is look at what all the options are and the priorities and what the timeline is for either bond-eligible projects through the city and/or if there's a way we could leverage these funds with the private investment and see what makes the most sense.
So if we were to approve the budget as you have it just right now, right? Not move any dimes anywhere. And streets came to us and said, we have the ability to fix it. Well, first, before I ask this hypothetical, Ben, can you orient me to the map that you just put on?
Certainly. So this is from the Citywide Pavement Condition Survey done in 2017. This is the fleet block in the lower right-hand corner. So this is 400 West, and then a block to the west of that is 500 West. Okay. And as you can see on 500 West, this 2-block stretch is rated as serious condition, which is just above failing, so one of the lowest rated streets in the city. The block below that is in very poor condition. And over on 400 West, This block is also in serious condition, and then below that is in poor condition. So just purely on the 2017 data, 500 West appears to be more deteriorated in worse condition, but both streets score very poorly, worse than the city average.
Okay, so now, thank you for that. Back to my hypothetical. If streets were to come to us and say, you know, this is the next street on our list that we're going, 500 West is the next street on our list that we're going to fix, and we've sort of earmarked this 1.7, I mean, we can capitalize on using both of those and maybe fix all of both 400 and 500, right? We can keep it as it is and use it there, and even if Streets comes and says you don't actually need to use all that 1.7.
Yeah, the way it is, if you approved it today, it would basically just sit in a holding account, and we as staff would come back with those options. And we would reach out both to Streets, see what their timeline is, availability. We would come back with the information from the developers and what their project is, and we would identify other potential uses in that area as well.
Okay. And then, since it, yeah.
About that, if you're looking at doing that, now remind me, since we're not really looking at transit, you know, streetcar or anything like that, are these roads that we're looking at going to be engineered for it for the heavier set trucks? Or if we want to look at light rail in the future or streetcar, is that something that we're looking for?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to what level we'd want to build the streets in terms of, you know, loading capacity. I do know that in our conversations with transportation and one of our items later in terms of potential project areas, that Granary is back on the radar in terms of potential streetcar or light rail extension or some kind of transit needs. And so I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well, that we're not going out and improving a street that we plan on later.
Because I know that we've gone away from that, but I don't want to see that. I want to see us looking at, you know, there has been a future land use map here for, you know, streetcar or light rail, and if that's the case, these roads need to be engineered for such.
Yeah, and that's a significant difference in how they are. So,
Andrew, did you have something to add there?
Madam Chair?
Yes, who said that?
Just a point of clarification, the bond is for street reconstructions, which of course both these streets are in need of. The sales tax increase was for street maintenance, but that was only for the first year. So the question during this upcoming budget for the council, and based on the mayor's recommendation, is do you want to continue that division, or do you want to change the increased sales tax to be for street maintenance and other uses? So just putting that in your minds, on your radar.
Thanks, Ben. Andrew?
I was just going to probably come back at some point to the 4th West, 5th West discussion. One of the questions is how do you prioritize, and I don't think there's an answer for that. Is there at this point?
not at this point, no. We're not able to address that or give a good answer, so we figured we'd come back and try to lay that out for you.
Okay. When you do, are you going to have discussion about the development patterns around both of those streets? I'm familiar with them in 5th dead ends, essentially. At 6th South, 4th goes all the way through. There's a big section of 4th that's been cleared out in the last year, right by 6th South.
Right.
And the question is what developments are planned to come in there, because we don't see a lot yet, and that may help determine this.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned the industry development, but I think that would actually be taking a look at the area and what all the developments are being proposed in the area, as well as you have to put on the radar the city's own fleet block and the priority for that as well. Okay. And I think that really probably does need to be a balance between where can get the biggest bang in terms of addressing what development is being proposed, as well as what the current conditions are of the road and where the highest need is.
Okay.
Okay, folks, we're running behind by a few 10 to 15 minutes, but this is important, so we're going to keep going and see what we can do about it. So, Charlie?
Okay, very quick, Madam Chair. So with the money that you've found, you have it identified here for different things that we can allocate it for. One of the things that I don't see, I know it's mentioned as something that we'd have to have a discussion about, but that's the ongoing maintenance and how we pay for ongoing maintenance. The next item on the agenda is going to be discussion about Central 9th and some of the commitments that include ongoing maintenance there. Did the RDA staff consider using the revenue that you found for those ongoing commitments so that we don't have to go to the general fund?
We did not, to be honest. As part of the 900 South discussion right after this, we've talked about the ongoing maintenance either being a function of city's general fund, an SAA, or parking revenue. Where that project area is expiring, we did not necessarily identify an ongoing commitment by the agency. The other project within this that would have an ongoing maintenance question would be Station Center. And as part of our overall maintenance discussion that we had a couple months with the board, one of the ideas for that was proposing to do an SAA that we as the agency put on the properties now prior to selling, and so the new owners would be conditioned upon that. And then the other outstanding item for ongoing maintenance is Regent Street, which we are currently funding through the RDA until we do find a long-term solution that is appropriate. So none of the other projects proposed within this, we anticipate an ongoing maintenance question, but if we do, we anticipate solving that as part of any future allocation of the board.
So could there be any of these projects that you would not, that we would not move, or could choose not to move forward with in order to reallocate that money towards the ongoing costs that we're looking now at different things with the general fund or parking revenue or something else?
Not at this time, because I think the only one that has potential of hitting the general fund in the short term would be 900 South. And I think that would just be a question as we presented, to what extent would the city council want to put forth a funding mechanism for that and not have that be the RDA. Station Center, I think we find a solution that removes it from general fund and limits it. And Regent Street, we hope to have a proposal that doesn't impact the general fund significantly.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Madam Chair, to that point, any time we are going to have discussions about potentially using general fund money to fund RDA commitments, I'm going to have some heartburn because there are a lot of RDA benefits, and those benefits should have been included in the planning, in the long-term planning for this. And I know that there's been a change in administration in the RDA, so I'm not faulting the RDA staff for doing this, but I would be much more comfortable if we were to figure out some sort of a mechanism within the RDA to fund those ongoing RDA projects, because the reality is that much of the streetscape issues that we're going to be talking about are above and beyond what we normally do throughout the rest of the city. And if we start paying for things that we've done that are above and beyond in RDA areas with the general fund money, it's shorting the rest of the city who have not been seeing some of the benefits of tax increment redistribution and the RDA tools. And so what I would like to see is us use any of the available money to shore up those commitments that we've made as an RDA in an ongoing basis, so that we don't end up having to poach from the general fund to subsidize a cherry on top of the sundae project in some of these other areas.
I appreciate that. I think that's last month we had the idea of putting the ongoing maintenance policy on the agenda. We took it off because there were some issues. We wanted to talk about 900 South and 9 Central. And I think that you bring up a really good point, Charlie, but at the same time, at some point, that asset then becomes a city asset and is no longer an RDA asset. And so I think part of the question is, at what point does the city say the city itself is receiving a benefit, and therefore we have at least some obligation to that benefit, right? And so I think there's a balance for sure, and I think it's a discussion that we should continue to have of, does the RDA pay for the maintenance while this is an RDA area? And then at some point, does that wean off and become a city benefit wherein the general fund of the city would be responsible for it, right? I mean, I think you're right, and I think we can certainly put it on a future agenda item, because it's a policy discussion that both the board and I think the council need to be having of, where does this become then a city obligation because the city side of things is reaping a benefit above because it's no longer an RDA area. Does that
Sure, but I think that would also, I mean, if that's the discussion and the philosophy moving forward, I think that would have to also inform whatever decision we make, because if we are going to go above and beyond and do something that is going to be much more maintenance intensive in these areas, with the assumption that the general fund is going to have to pay for it, that would certainly inform my decision. I would be much less inclined to do something that would be, above and beyond what we normally do, if the intent is to have the general fund subsidize it in the future. Now, I do think, though, that there are other projects, for example, the street reconstruction. That is something that, that's totally different.
Right.
If we want to look at that and using that as, based on the bond that we just passed, because those are, regular city streets, I would be I'd be more okay with that than I would be, trying to fund the extras that we commit to as an RDA board that would have expensive ongoing costs.
I agree. And I think, as Danny mentioned, though, through these a lot of what we are seeing, and this is happened well before any of us were sitting here. Yep. And now we're committed to picking up the pieces and trying to follow through with promises we didn't make. But I think as we move forward, part of the discussion we have as chair, vice chair, and as this board is, where is that maintenance piece, and how do we make sure that that's somehow either on the property owners in advance so that they're well aware of it, or we lower whatever the expectation is.
Which makes sense, but as long as we have
Sorry, everyone.
as long as we have newfound money, we ought to at least be thinking about it now.
Agreed.
Using that money.
And I think it's something we can put on a future agenda, and as chair, maybe we can put it on a future RDA agenda and at the same time as a council agenda item, so we can continue the discussion. So I think you're right.
Cool.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know we're in a hurry. I want to highlight a couple of things that we did intentionally, and some of us were on the board at the time, create this project area designed to bring local businesses in. Mm-hmm. We did this on purpose, and we put our tax increment investments toward supporting local business as this particular Central 9th area. And it is not apples to apples for us to say, the downtown business district pays for their extras. And so now that we've created this to cultivate local businesses and small business types, we are going to shift the same formula onto you. I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but I think we need to be cognizant that we built local business in here on purpose, and we should be considerate of that as we go about this. And then I also want to highlight what the member of the new Central 9th Community Council said in our public hearing, that they have more proactively than any other community council in District 5 sat down with the RDA to say, what can we do to support this? And that they are promoting that we install paid parking meters in front of their businesses. And there's a strategy there too to keep parking moving through, but they're proactively coming to the table and saying, we know that we're local businesses and we can't contribute the way an SAA might be developed in other parts of the city, but this is what we're willing to do. I want to recognize that.
Thank you. Okay.
I just want to highlight.
Real quick, Chris was first.
Thank you.
That's fine.
So doesn't that create, you said that this wouldn't become an ongoing general fund obligation, but isn't that the case with the 300 West streetscape improvements too? Isn't it a similar situation to the 9th?
Yes, that to extent, yes, I'd left that one off. That is a UDOT road, so to the extent that UDOT is not maintaining it, that would fall on the city, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight that, we do go through these, and we go through, and if you look at North Temple and 300 West, we do promise, extra amenities, and I just feel like it's put so much pressure on the general fund to do it. And Lisa Schaefer, bless her heart, she has done an amazing job with stretching those dollars. I saw the 300 West streetscapes getting done last week, so fantastic. But, North Temple needs work. And so, it was, when we move these deals forward, we have got to really talk to not the business owners, but the property owners, because they're the individuals that are benefiting from these improvements as their property values go up. So, Central 9th for me, that I pushed back on these underground because I don't think that there were other options put and informed us of it. They were just told, yeah, this is what you're going to have happen, and that's not the truth because there were other options out there that we can see. So as we move forward, we need to have these policy discussions before we start, integrating new project areas. Because if we're going to look at betterments for the city, I see where Charlie's coming from, where we should not continue to put that stress on the general fund unless it's a policy discussion. And then we fund it through the general fund so that Lisa Schaefer can have those things taken care of.
And again, I agree. And I think these are discussions that Danny and I have certainly had, and we kind of are now expecting as we go forward and looking at project areas of that piece of what is the ongoing maintenance going to look like. And if that lowers the expectation and what we can promise, so that we can actually maintain it, then that's what we do. But I think each project area is unique and different. And that was part of the reason we took the maintenance piece off of the agenda, was because it's almost as if it's better for Danny and his team to come to us and say, we've already talked to all of the property owners, this is what they're willing to do for that ongoing maintenance, that to allow them the flexibility to say, here's how we have thought about that maintenance problem, that ongoing maintenance issue, instead of having a clear-cut policy that just says this is how every maintenance is going to be, because every project is different. And that was part of a chair-vice chair decision to say, let's take this off and kind of let this grow organically, but with the idea that we always have to have that at the forefront of our mind so that we're not putting pressures on our general fund. And interestingly, this just sort of goes into our next agenda item, and we're kind of mixing both of them around, so it's fine. But are there other questions just on the budget right now?
Will we have time to come back to it, Madam Chair? Because I
So-
do have questions on the West Temple Gateway policy questions that Ben had.
Go ahead.
Do we do those?
Yeah,
And
do
maybe,
those now.
Danny, maybe you're ready to go through them pretty quickly.
I am happy
So to my peers, I'm on page 4 of 27 in our packet, and that's at the bottom portion. These are the policy questions regarding the West Temple Gateway. So did we look at the traffic signals being covered by CIP?
We have court as part of the 900 South improvements item after this can report in terms of what is eligible for CIP funding, and Jason Birmingham of Lewis and Young is here to help provide some information on what components of that overall streetscape project can be eligible for CIP and how that may work. So
Madam Chair,
Debbie,
are
if
you
I can, sorry, if there are questions beyond West Temple Gateway, because that West Temple Gateway discussion, I think, will really kind of be more on our 900 and our next agenda item. Are there any other questions on the budget besides that sort of West Temple Gateway? Because we will be getting into that in a little bit more depth in the few minutes we have.
Madam Chair, I don't see on our agenda what our next action is. It's maybe April.
So we have on the consent agenda today to put this on our April meeting for
A public hearing.
a public hearing. Thanks, Ben.
And do you foresee that in our April meeting? I know it's a late one that month, isn't
It's
it?
April 23rd.
That we would be able to come back if we have some adjustments based on the next discussion to the budget, that we could be able to do that.
I think we can put it on the agenda again for kind of the public hearing and some more discussion, because
Okay.
I think that we'll probably need that a little bit.
All right, then I can hold off. Thanks.
Okay, with that, oh yeah, sorry, Andrew.
Okay. I'm not going to talk about light pole banners, even though I'm interested, and James is going to make fun of me. Question on North Temple and the Folsom Trail. The policy question, I think, is a good one for a follow-up item. I'm still a little confused about the actual funding that's set aside for that versus what's being used on 3rd North for the pedestrian bridge. I think the funds were sort of mingled in that Tiger grant and split out. So it'd be nice to have a written sort of diagram of what's in the Folsom Trail itself, budget, where it's coming from, so we can discuss it in future.
We can follow up with a clear delineation of what the existing funding is, what the sources are, and what potential funding gaps might be. We also learned that the Tiger grant, since it was less than the amount UTA originally requested, that there have been scope reductions and some project removals. And so we'll follow up with UTA, since they're the lead agency, to get the latest update.
So on both projects? No, not just my project. No, but we're talking about the Tiger grant was for at least those two, more projects than that, but those two particular projects, 3rd North and Folsom Trail. So we'll get a full impact of what it means for those two. Is that accurate?
That's what we'll ask for. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, never mind. Go.
I think I'm good. I can talk to you offline about pole banners.
Okay, anything else? Then we will move on to the next big thing, which is 900 South. We had to get it done yeah. The next one's pretty Greek salad-y. In fact, it's the city of Frisco, so it's very Greeky. It's hot in here. Okay, welcome. Hi, Court.
Thank you. We've got a couple slides here. It looks like, thank you for pulling that up, Ben. It's been a while since we've talked about Central 9th Streetscape, and so, right?
About 2 minutes.
I'll say it's been a while since we've talked about the big picture. How about that? And so what I wanted to do is start today just with a couple of slides and kind of pull back and look at the forest instead of the trees and talk about why we're doing this, what it's all about, so that when we dig into some of the particulars, which we've already started doing, we all have that shared point of reference. And so the project is really just based in this notion that great cities are made of great neighborhoods. And I think as an extension of that, great neighborhoods have a heart or a center. And the street plays an important role as the public space. And so we have examples of those in Salt Lake City, and there are many of them, but we frequently talk about 9th and 9th. We frequently talk about 15th and 15th. But there are others. And the redevelopment strategy in Central 9th has been to create a neighborhood center. It's got all the ingredients. It's got a light rail station. It's got freeway access. It's got a proximity to downtown. It's got a collection of small, old neighborhood homes. And it's got a growing local business community. And our strategy over the years has been to utilize RDA resources to bring in these small local businesses that can be an engine for redevelopment. The commercial component or the neighborhood services component of development is the more risky side. And so we knew if we could take care of those things with RDA efforts, the residential stuff would largely take care of itself. And I think that largely that is bearing fruit in Central 9th. This is the existing street. This is 900 South looking east. You can see the Alinea project there on the left, which is now completed, so this photograph's a little bit old. You can see the train over there going through on the right. A standard 132-foot right-of-way, 5-foot wide sidewalks, 2 lanes in each direction, a turning pocket. Kind of a neighborhood that you would drive through or pass by. And the neighborhood vision is really one that you would, a neighborhood where you would sit and stay a while. It's much more leafy, it's much more pedestrian friendly. It's the kind of place where a small local business would thrive. This vision, by the way, is not my vision. This isn't the RDA's. In 2011, the RDA adopted a strategy for redevelopment of the West Temple Gateway project area. It identified a lack of amenities and the need for them in order for the area to redevelop. And so we went out to the neighborhood property owners and the residents and the businesses and said, what do you want? Is it a park? Is it a community garden? Is it street improvements? And street improvements was the thing that they wanted most. And so we held a neighborhood workshop to envision those, and what came out were these 5 goals. Again, it's about improving the pedestrian environment, calming the traffic, a place where bikes are comfortable, and then the latter 2 points really a place where small local business can thrive. Those goals translate into these items, which are kind of the physical changes we're proposing. Widening the sidewalks, planting as many trees as we can, reconfiguring the street as well as the on-street parking so that it's safer, calmer, and more efficient. Incorporating the 9-line trail. This is part of that 8-mile corridor or transect across the valley. One of the things that's interesting, I think, about Central 9th is it's really kind of this connection point between East Side and West Side, and improving the crosswalks. A companion project for the street is the burial of the underground power lines, and that is in the scope shown here. It's a 2-block stretch of 900 South from West Temple to 300 West, and then about a block and a half or 2 blocks north and south from 8th South to about 10th South. What we found as we were working with developers in the neighborhood is we kept hearing about this 30-foot height limit. We can only go to 30 feet court, and then we got to provide aerial access because of the fire department rules, and what do we do? And if the parcel's not big enough to build a 26-foot wide fire lane to accommodate the fire department, you have to underground the overhead utilities. And so we identified that as a barrier to redevelopment, and there's a secondary benefit, which is removing the poles just provides greater flexibility when we're laying out the street improvements. So that kind of became part and parcel to the overall project. That's Madam Chair, that's sort of the big picture, why we're doing it and what it is. The board has supported these projects with previous appropriations of $3.6 million for the streetscape, $2.29 for the power lines, and there's some funding contingencies placed on those, and I can give you a quick summary of those things, or we can just go straight to questions if that's helpful.
Well, I think for me, there's the new development in this project, right, is that there is the possibility of combining this with, is it transportation that wants to go throughout that whole corridor, right?
Correct.
So can you talk about that? Let's jump straight there.
Yeah, and we have John Larson with Transportation here, Jen McGrath's here, Public Utilities, Lisa Schaefer's here, Rocky Mountain Power's here. But
Jen and Lisa, will you guys join us at the table, please?
There's a working group comprised of the Transportation Division, Engineering Division, Public Utilities, and they have a host of projects planned for 900 South. And they asked us, they said, would you incorporate the streetscape project and the utility undergrounding in with these broader projects? The goal being, if we plan all these things together and we implement them in a coordinated fashion, we're going to get more bang for our buck, and we're going to have less impact on the neighborhoods. So we like that approach. I think it's going to be a better project for the city, a better project for Central 9th. Our one kind of concern is time. We've got small business and small development partners that we've worked with over the years that are anticipating and hoping for these improvements to be made, and we don't want to delay them any more than we have to.
With that said, has there been community outreach regarding, I mean, Aaron mentioned earlier that that particular community group has been incredibly vocal and proactive, and I know that they would like to see the streetscapes, but I also know that if this is I would hope that if we can coordinate as a team, right, that the streetscape may even be better than what we could do, particularly because we had a concern about how we were going to continue maintaining it, right? It's been part of our discussion since we've been talking about the 9th Central streetscape. So one question is, has there been any community outreach at this point with those business owners or that community group? My brain needs something like sugar or something, but yes, go.
Yes, I've been attending the community council board meetings for Central 9th, and we would have to ask Mary, who's still here, but I think it's fair to say that they like the consolidated approach as long as it doesn't delay the project. Is that a fair? All right.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's talk about what that consolidated approach is and what that timing would look like. Go for it, whoever wants to.
So
I just want to say for your reference, we did receive as part of the transmittal, and it's up on the big screen, the 10 projects that could be consolidated from 3 different departments. So this is a nice summary, and you'll note that some of them are not fully funded and some of them have TBD. So one of the questions in the staff report is identifying what those funding gaps might be. But this, I think, is a nice summary of the scope of how large of a consolidation this could potentially be.
Wow. Let's hold there, Court.
Sure.
Are there specific questions about this? Because I think Ben's right in that this does give kind of a nice summary, and maybe it might be more beneficial to go to specific questions, knowing that this is kind of what the idea looks like, and then we'll get, unless you can address the timing piece first, like when we're prepared to start on consolidating these projects.
Yeah, so we, as has been mentioned, we've been having a lot of internal meetings. I think the team has done a great job of including all of the players in this, because this, you can see that this is complex, and there is a lot of potential here, but there are also a lot of moving parts that we have to think about. I want to say, I think we need to give a lot of credit to that team, especially Public Utilities, who has said, this is probably not the way we would want to do it, but if there is a desire for us to consolidate this, we will work with you and we will do our portion in conjunction with yours if that's what makes best sense for the city and if that's the direction that we want to go. So there's a great partnership in place here, and there's a lot of desire to make this work. What I will say is we are committed to moving forward with a consolidated program. And we are committed to trying to meet the timeline that has already been put in place for the Central 9th piece. What I can't say is between today and when we get through design, if there isn't something that comes up in that process that might delay that. So from my perspective, what we need to understand is the consolidation and the potential benefits that we get from that consolidation worth the chance that we might have to delay the Central 9th piece by a year? Or is there no circumstance under which that would be palatable? Because while we can commit today to say, given the circumstances we understand right now, we believe that we can put that piece in with the timeline that exists. What I don't know is what we will uncover between now and then. And so for me, that's what I see as kind of the critical question to answer.
Jen, have you ever thought about being a lawyer? Because that was a real lawyer answer.
I took the LSAT and I decided against it. So yes, I think it was the right choice not to do it for me.
Are there questions? Aaron? Whatever you want. You go for it, Andrew.
I think it makes sense with the consolidation concept. I get it. I think it makes sense on various levels for me. My bigger question is, do we have a policy or a matrix in which to view the city and evaluate when undergrounding of power lines makes more sense than others? Because it seems to me this is a hot neighborhood. I get it. It's wonderful. I love the sense of undergrounding lines everywhere we can, but there's clearly a cost involved. Have we had that discussion anywhere? Because this is theoretically going to come up elsewhere in the city, and we may say no elsewhere, and I want to know sort of why I would say no or yes here versus elsewhere.
I don't think we have that kind of a policy, Danny. I'm looking at you. Are you aware? Are you aware of one? I'm not.
I haven't found it in my desk if we have it. No, to answer your question, you're exactly right that this has come up in other projects, both RDA and citywide. I mean, this is the crux of the Grand Boulevards question in terms of what we do on 600 and 500 South. This is an issue for RDA property, both in Station Center and on 100 South, in terms of to what extent is the development potential of a property limited by the existence of those power lines, and how do you determine which projects warrant undergrounding it and which ones don't? I think here it's important in neighborhoods like this because you do have the smaller parcels. You don't necessarily have the consolidation of larger parcels that can provide that secondary access for aerial assistance in firefighting. And I will tell you long-term, just in terms of what we've seen with RDA, I think it is very much something that the city does need to look at and prioritize and start identifying those opportunities to work with Rocky Mountain Power to align either the extension or burial or placement of power lines as it relates to future land use plans and growth of the city. That is something we are not really actively looking at right now.
From a larger perspective, what I'm concerned about long term is we've got some great areas that have really flourished in the last 40 years, RDA areas, right? Some of the areas we've done are now the most desirable in the city, have the highest property values, and therefore they are very desirable on multiple levels. They're also the places where you get these amenities. When I think about, say, a 13 South corridor, which has probably as much, if not more, pedestrian traffic, but does not have the pull of an area like this, they may not be viewed as desirable to invest this money in. And I'm concerned that there may be an increasing push in the city to have areas where, in this example, lines are undergrounded because it's desirable, and we're going to spend a lot of money doing it because that neighborhood looks better, where other neighborhoods may not be able to advocate like that for various reasons and end up not having the amenity. That's why I'm concerned about the policy now.
Yeah.
I love undergrounding lines everywhere we can. I just know that certain neighbors aren't going to advocate like this for it.
Yeah. No, and I think it'd be a great policy to have because then you could align both future project areas in the city. You could take a look at what the economic impact is for areas as it relates to potential for land development, as well as what the appetite is for some of the property owners to maybe participate in the cost for undergrounding.
And I think we've talked about the 13th South as it relates to State Street project area, but also because the new HRC is down there. I say that because there's a track station there. It's got heavy pedestrian traffic and awful sidewalks. Probably the same issues we're seeing here, but it's not a boutique neighborhood, and it's not going to have a 9-line walking through it and a track station like this and high-end development. And we're willing to do it here, but are we willing to do it elsewhere? That's my concern. So, and I get it. Some of the things I'm thinking about, is it a track station, right? That's going to spur a lot of residential development, especially high, denser residential development up. I get that piece. I get the small lot pieces. And so there's factors that I think are totally legitimate factors in this case. But if we're not willing to do it elsewhere, I'm hesitant to sort of do it here.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I think this is why we delayed the underground, is because this plan needed to come forward. I really love this idea. I think it connects even further the west to the east. It just makes a lot more sense. You know, we're talking about, looking at streets where the engineering is heavy set for streetcar or rail or whatever we're looking at. I just think this gives us every opportunity to invest with a policy discussion, for future areas as well for this. So I really love this. I think this is a great opportunity for us to set the standard.
I appreciate that. I do want to go back real quick. I know, Aaron, you have some comments, but to something Andrew said, and I'm looking at you, Charlie, because I think it's a council thing, is, I know, is kind of going to what both Danny and Andrew said, that it would be interesting to have a policy discussion on working with Rocky Mountain Power, or how we work with Rocky Mountain Power for future land use, and maybe looking at how we prioritize undergrounding and what that really looks like. Because Andrew, I think you're absolutely right that, that 9th Central is lucky to have the activist community that they have that can be vocal about it, but I don't know that everywhere would have that and wouldn't be getting the amenities because they don't have that, right? And maybe it's worth looking at it from a council perspective, and I would look to the chair to consider that request.
So, thank you. And I think it's a good idea. My question is one of priorities and how we work that in. So maybe maybe the way that we start this out is to have a smaller working group. And I know that working groups sometimes get complicated because you have a smaller group trying to represent the feelings of the full council. But on something like this, where I think we need to, there's a lot of discussion I think that needs to take place before it ever comes in front of all 7 of us. And so, maybe what we could do is have, 2 or 3 people, from the council. So Andrew has expressed interest. Probably you, Madam Chair, and Aaron could, make up that group. We could work with the RDA. We could work with CAN and David from the administration. You could point us to the right people to work on that group. And then, of course, Rocky Mountain Power. Let's have all of you try to, make a run at figuring out what we, would then bring forward before all 7 of us.
That's an excellent idea. Thanks, Charlie. We'll get on that. Erin, I know you had some thoughts.
Thank you. I do have a few. I'll try to be quick. Can we get to the traffic signals first? That was listed in our past agenda item. So the prompt is around the need, or maybe you could elaborate on the requisite of 3 traffic signal replacements that are pretty broadly estimated around $700,000 to $260,000.
Yeah, so there are, the proposed improvements impact 3 intersections. And so the $780,000 is a worst-case scenario for if we had to replace all of the traffic signals in those intersections. And so we don't know yet. We have 50% drawings, whether or not, how many of those poles are going to have to be removed and replaced. And we don't know, in our conversations with transportation, to what degree we can actually reuse a pole, whether you can sort of unbolt the thing and use it again. So because of those unknowns, we sort of budgeted for the worst case scenario so that we weren't in a position where we had to come back and ask for more money.
And is CIP a possibility?
I would need John to speak to that.
He happens to be sitting right behind
me.
you. Thanks, John.
Table here. Look how kind we are to leave the table.
So we get enough, we've been historically getting enough money for replacing maybe 2 to 4 signals a year with CIP money. And we've prioritized the signals that, like the old span wire signals or signals that are deteriorating. And so we'd recommend that we use the CIP money for those signals. The problem with these signals is they're well-functioning operational signals, and the only reason that they'd be replaced would be to accommodate changes to the street. And
Is
so,
there anything that this board can do to influence your option of reusing the signals?
at this point, I think that's maybe premature. We need to get into the design to really understand what
Okay, but
what the options are.
In looking at the potential for $780,000 as a component of this streetscape improvement and the potential to save that builds in a kind of contingency, so to speak, that which gets to, I think, the neighborhood's concern and my concern that by consolidating this Herculean task, that we bring up the risk of increased costs by waiting, right? So
Right.
I'm looking for ways for us to build some insurance.
Yeah.
And reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Let's
Right.
build that into our streets.
Yeah, and that's very much the attitude and the approach that we would take.
Okay.
I think the worst case scenario would be that we get into it and that we haven't had enough budgeted, and then we find that we don't have enough to be able to do it right. One example is the signal on Highland and oh shoot.
It's okay. We're probably
Anyway, where it's actually paid for by the developer, and they ended up thinking that they'd only have to do one mast arm, and they ended up having to redo the whole thing, and it's they
no
hadn't
more worst
budgeted
case
for it, and it got
scenarios
them in
today.
trouble.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. My other question is around asking the RDA to, and I'm looking at Jennifer McGrath, I know that it's wonderful that we have projects happening in the central 9th area. We have 4 of them at some point in the pipeline. And I would like to ask the RDA to work with engineering to make sure that we are consistently applying what I hope is a lack of requirement for these construction efforts to immediately put in their pedestrian infrastructure improvements that we know will be ripping out. There is not an HRC right here. And so I'm actually okay with us delaying that investment. It's significant cost. And I'm hearing that it's not being uniformly applied. So I just want to ask that RDA and engineering can work together to solve that.
That is an issue that was brought up to me late Friday. To be honest, it was a thing that just wasn't on my radar. That being said, we've discussed it as a group, and while I don't have the answer, I hadn't heard about any inconsistencies, so I'm looking into that. Our folks are looking into that to make sure that we are being consistent. But the other thing that we're doing is we want to understand what the timing looks like, and then we want to come up with a solution based on what that timing is. So the solution that we might have for if we know that the project is going to happen next year might be different than if we know it's going to happen in 2 years. But what we want to do is keep in mind that we don't want to make people put in improvements that we know are getting ripped out if there's an alternative to that. So like I said, it's new on my radar within the last 48 hours of working time, but we're working on it. We know that it's a thing, and we want to try to find a solution for that.
Can I ask that Councilmember Valdemoros and I be updated on the solution
Absolutely.
aspect so that as we're hearing from those developers and those businesses that we can understand what your approach is?
Absolutely. Thank you.
And do you have any updates on the 650 South Main Street track station?
Julianne, do we have an update on that? Sorry.
We did receive updates from the RDA on Friday, and we sent those to the council.
I'll look for those, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. I think Julianne's coming up here to maybe save this. I guess I should have my mic on.
I'm sorry, I was typing a spreadsheet, and so I missed. I heard track station, but I didn't hear beyond that.
That's
on
it.
650
You
track
get a
station.
demerit. Just kidding.
Okay. 650 track station. We have been working in collaboration with the RDA, us in transportation, and UTA, as well as private developers who initially requested of Bill Knowles, actually. They approached him, I think, initially, and then have kind of variously approached us about a desire for a track station at 650 South. There's a lot of development on the order of magnitude of 5,000 residents and jobs within a block of that location over the next 2 years. So it's significant, and it's an opportunity to reduce the demand for parking, as well as just to offer transportation choices.
May I ask about that? So when might the board anticipate learning about timeline and agreements and investment?
Right now, if you'd like.
We sent that in the information to council already.
I believe so. I think that we have been shuffling the information back and forth, and in talking with UTA, here's what can be done. We have an agreement we can use as a foundation that was used for the Central 9th track station with the RDA previously, and so we have an agreement that can be at least used as a basis, and we could develop it pretty quickly and start design this year, and we could build the station next year.
Wow.
If we want. We just need agreements with those private sector partners, and they're just looking for a fair distribution, but they've expressed a lot of enthusiasm.
Thanks. Did you include a maintenance piece into that? I'm kidding.
For UTA?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you have another question, Erin? Okay, so we're going to move on, but one of the things I would ask is I really do appreciate this summary, this table up here, and I'm wondering if the necessary people can look at these TBDs and maybe come up with an estimate of what those would be. So we as a council, or as a board and council to be fair, could kind of get an idea of what we're looking at with this consolidated plan. It certainly plays a role in the RDA budget discussion, as many of you were sitting here while we were having that discussion, because we've allocated some money, but there's also potentially some money to allocate as well, or utilize and capitalize on. And so I think maybe I could ask the administration and the staff to kind of look at those and provide us with some estimates, and maybe we can revisit this idea. And with that, I'm looking at you, Danny, to say, what is our next, what's the action needed from the board?
I think the first action needed from the board obviously would be as part of Budget Amendment 4 and allocating those funds, because then that represents an allocation of RDA funds that can then become part of the larger conversation for consolidation. I assume at that point, or parallel to that, it also probably needs to be kicked over to the city council side so that we can properly address the issues you're bringing up in terms of the funding, the timeline, and how this would mesh together. And I'll look at Jen to see if there's anything I left out of that.
I would just go back to what I said previously. I think the big question is a potential delay of a year even on the table for conversation or not? And if it is, can we move forward with at least a consolidated design at this point, knowing that we'd be coming back and checking in, and knowing that we would be prioritizing the RDA section over the others? For me, that's the big question that I think we need to answer in the immediate future.
Okay. Again, I would look to the council chair, vice chair to potentially put that on a future agenda so we can address that question with that. And I would suggest, for me personally, it would be helpful to have those numbers before that agenda item, right, of those estimates of what those costs on those TBDs might be.
Yes.
I also want to say I understand the concern from the community. I've met with several of the community members and business owners of the delay, and I know and I appreciate you, Jen, kind of keeping your eye towards that. But I really want to say this is awesome. We've been talking about this since I've been on the council, of why aren't all of these groups and departments working together so that we are really capitalizing and not ripping up a street and then ripping it up again, and then my constituents call and rip it up again, and really collaborating and working together and finding ways to capitalize our efforts, our teams, our money, is awesome. And yay, good work, everyone. So strong work, team, strong work. Okay. Next item, we're gonna get rid of some of the meat and go to something a little less meaty.
I'm ready to make the motion. Do we even need to talk about it?
I don't know. So our next item, where did my agenda go? Is somewhere. It is looking at our, thank you, public art donation process. And Danny, do you want to just give a quick
Madam
background
Interest,
on
in the interest of time, I will be really quick, but obviously open to any questions as you have. This is a request that has come to the city in terms of proposing and installing a statue of Vasilios Priskos that would be on the walkway south of the Eccles Theater that connects to Regent Plaza. And the request before the board is because the RDA does not have a formal art donation policy. To what extent would the board like to consider how to proceed? You can adopt the city's policy ongoing basis. You can adopt the city's policy on a one-time basis, and then direct staff to kind of formulate a certain one for the RDA, or you can do nothing, which would then mean that this becomes just purely an administrative function, because in absence of a policy, that's how we would handle it. So that's a very high-level request before you. Happy to get into any details of how that would proceed and what those details would be of how it would either come back to the board or not come back to the board.
And go
ahead, you ask yours.
I just wanted to say real quick that just for the board's reference, the city's policy simply says, if you didn't have a chance to look at it, simply just says, any art kind of goes to an art board and is vetted and then decided there, and we kind of stay out of it until. For the most
then
part.
They would forward a recommendation to the mayor for approval. And I should also note that part of the reason this has somewhat come up is while it is on agency property, it's a walkway that essentially represents a public easement and may or may not at some point be transferred to the city. And so I think it's important that the city take that into account as we look at what direction we head in.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I move that the board adopt City Code 3.60 on an ongoing basis as the RDA guiding policy for donations of public art.
Any discussion? I have a motion by Board Member Wharton, a second by Board Member Luke. Any discussion on that? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yay. Done and done. Look how
Very happy. She didn't even have to say anything. Look
light
at that.
it was very salady of us. Good work, everyone.
That was like a little, like aperitif, you know?
Yeah.
How fast, yeah.
Yeah, that was
It
good.
just a little, a soupçon.
Moving on to our project area transition and dissolution update. Danny and Tammy.
Okay, as Tammy comes up, I will just kind of set the stage for the next item. As we have looked at West Temple Gateway expiring last year, as well as Sugar House prior to that, what we realize is in terms of state statute, it is very clear when a project area expires that agency no longer collects tax increment. That then funnels back to the entities. And then it is up to the city council in terms of passing an ordinance to officially terminate a project area. And so the question in the policy discussion before you is to what extent does the agency want to have a policy or set terms for which we would actually take that action after a project area expires, and to what extent would we continue to operate within a project area in that in-between phase of no longer collecting increment and then officially terminating a project area. And so I've probably just done a horrible job of trying to be quick and summarize it, so I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, who has a better grasp of the details of that. So.
Great. I can be quick as well. I know we're running behind. So as
We're
Danny,
okay. You have time. We caught up.
As Danny stated, it is up to the City Council and the RDA board when a project area is officially closed. So a resolution and an ordinance needs to be passed. And then we need to file notice of that with the county and other appropriate agencies. So we do have 3 project areas that are currently transitioning to dissolution, which is Sugar House, which the last year of tax increment was 2016, West Temple Gateway, which the last year of tax increment was 2018, and then that was West Temple Gateway, and then West Capitol Hill. We're still collecting tax increment, but only through an extension for a limited purpose, which is to collect money to finish the 300 West Streetscape project. So once that project's completed, we will no longer be collecting tax increment. So just a quick update on those 3 project areas. So the RDA will remain active in those areas until all projects are completed, funds are expended, and the RDA board and city council take steps to close the areas. So in Sugar House, really the outstanding project is redevelopment of the former Deseret Industry site. In West Temple Gateway, the outstanding projects are Infinite Scale, which recently broke ground directly across the street from the market, Spy Hop, which should be breaking ground later this summer, West Montrose site redevelopment, Jefferson Mixed Use, which is directly behind the market, and the 900 South Streetscape project, which we were just speaking about. In West Capitol Hill, there's the Arctic Court single-family home, the new construction home that we will be working on this upcoming year, Marmalade Block Mixed Use, Marmalade Park, and the 300 West Streetscape project. So just a couple of policy questions posed to the board. The 2 main programs that the RDA uses are the Tax Increment Reimbursement Program and the RDA Loan Program. So the Tax Increment Reimbursement Program precludes any future tax increment reimbursements if we're not collecting tax increment, but there's no policy that the board has with when we shut off the RDA loan program. So really a question to you is how much longer should we extend that tool in these neighborhoods? Some policy questions to consider when looking at the RDA program is program need. Typically this program's used for catalytic projects that can't receive traditional financing and these project areas are taking off to some extent, and projects are happening without RDA support. Capture of tax increment from new development, that's limited since we're no longer collecting tax increment. Limited availability of loan funds. We've recently seen an influx of RDA loan requests and interest in applications. So just prioritize, the board may want to prioritize active project areas over ones that are phasing out. And then just another policy consideration, if the board does select to phase out the RDA loan program, affordable housing loans will still be eligible because those are available citywide. So I'm happy to answer questions or take feedback.
Madam Chair, I just have, I guess, one question. Most of these are still in our current project areas except for the Sugar House. What's going on with the former Desert Industries site?
We are working with the city to consolidate the DI property with the former fire station property, and once we get finalization of whether that's going to happen, our intention is to put the property out on the market. So.
Any idea what you're looking at? Is it residential or is it mixed use?
It'd be a residential development with an affordability component.
For both of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one consolidated project.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, now what do you need from us? A decision?
I think the biggest issue that we'd probably want from a policy decision is to what extent would we want to continue to entertain applications for loans? Obviously, as a project area like West Temple Gateway expires, there are a few property owners that we are in discussions with right now that have been that way since before the project area terminated. But you don't want to go on too long within a project area because at some point you just accept that you're done and you move on. And so as a staff, what we've kind of gone back and forth with is whether that should be anywhere between 1, 2, or 3 years that we really want to realistically continue that opportunity. And I don't know if there's a magic answer behind that. I mean, 1 year probably seems at least the minimum that you would want to see if projects kind of wrap up their application and if they are or are not going to happen. But I think a great example is a project that probably is not going to happen but for RDA investment, and so would you want to leave that opportunity available? You can certainly make the program that has a hard date of 1 year, and then maybe any application beyond that is with the consent and approval of the board, waiving that condition. You can structure it somehow like that, but it definitely is helpful for us as a staff to understand when we are done receiving requests.
So, Madam Chair, I guess my question would be, in here on our staff report it says, for West Capitol Hill, the original is 1997 to 2017, or until 5.27 million is reached. Is that something that staff would look at, as saying that we would look at X amount of time frame or a money value, seeing whichever comes first?
Yeah, and West Capitol Hill, because it has that condition, is probably a little bit different than West Temple Gateway, where we don't have that. I mean, that was extended strictly until we got that dollar amount to do that project, and so we've interpreted that as we're not doing anything else except collecting money, wrapping up our projects, and then we're going to do that as one of our final projects. And so that's a good example of one that we had a finite date that we were going to. Once we hit that, we're doing that last project and we're done.
And I should also note that I believe it was January of 2015, the board passed a motion to discontinue the RDA loan program in the Sugar House area. So that was already done in Sugar House, but we're still actively accepting applications in the other 2 areas.
Erin?
I was wondering about, this reminded me of one of the budget items, which was the expanding adaptive reuse grant program. And the question was about whether or not the staff want to talk about the adaptive reuse grant program to other project areas. And that also reminds me of the Building Facade Improvement Loan Fund. Is that through?
That's through
That's
HAND.
your hand.
Mm-hmm. But it's limited right now in its scope.
It is.
So not for right now, but those what I perceive as smaller programs, loan fund programs, I would love to have a discussion in a future date about maybe there are some that we would consider maintaining availability of through the life of the project area, and maybe there's some greater scale financing that we don't want to enter into late. But those are ones that seem to help us be able to kind of address some of the smaller scale projects or the potential to improve the overall quality of an area.
And just if I can ask a clarification on that, is your question, the policy question in the memo that says, have we looked at extending that to other project areas, or is your question that you would want to have that and other programs potentially continue in project areas that have terminated?
The first.
Okay, that's what I assumed, but I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would encourage us to look at adopting some policy, say 2 years post end of the tax increment collection. I say that just because if the staff's recommendation is somewhere to 1 to 3, 2 seems like a nice sort of fit. We can always change it in the middle or make exceptions, but until we have a deadline, developers don't know what to gun for and what they have to work towards, and none of us do either. It can be open-ended. So I'm not concerned about limiting us as much as leaving too much ambiguity to get things moving and keep it moving.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that? I think that we could ask administration and staff to put an ordinance of something like that together and have a future agenda item around that.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Look at that, you got some direction on that one. I didn't know where that was going, so nice work, Andrew.
You're welcome. I'll be here all night.
Our next agenda item is the project area creation priorities, and we're going to pull that one. So look at you, Suze. You don't have to do anything because we need to, Anna is back, and we need to go back to the Block 67 creation area, CRA. I would invite Katie to come to the table. There may be some questions regarding the language in the resolution that we're going to go through real quick before we take action on it. And if I can ask, was there any other revisions to this from the last one we got? And if so, can I get another printed version?
Yes, I believe so.
There were a few. I would classify most of them as minor, with the exception of one that I emailed the board about just now, and we can go over that when we get there.
I'm sorry, will you get us copies, get the council copies?
Sorry.
Of the very latest version, the thing that Jennifer's got there?
I'll,
thing that she has, I mean.
let me look. I don't know.
This is the one that you folded over.
Yeah, I think they did change. Yeah, they changed.
I'll go, is it on the iDrive?
Yeah, it's in the meeting presentations, yeah. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, we have time, you're okay.
They didn't change significantly from some of the revisions that we brought around sooner, so maybe Allison can go through some of them. It's the same resolution essentially as before, so go ahead.
Right, so it's basically the same resolution that the Attorney's Office provided for a review earlier. What has changed are the be it further resolved section, so it's near the end of the current version of the ordinance. So starting with be it further resolved, basically these are the conditions that would apply to for the Block 67 project, and that would be listed in the interlocal cooperation agreement. And sorry, I'm reading long distance, so. Thank you. So, item A would be the commitment that the RDA would use the transportation funds in stereo. Use the transportation funds for the developer's construction of the parking structure, and the transportation funds will be repaid to the county from tax increment collected from the Block 67 North project area. The second would be verification from the county that the tax increment repayment amount will be used by the county for a new revolving loan program and a description of the county's proposed loan program and associated terms for the reuse of the tax increment for other regionally significant transportation projects, including parking structures. Item C is commitment from the county that commitment from the county that Salt Lake City and/or the RDA will have the right to request future funds from this program in its pro rata share of the tax increment repayment amount for projects within Salt Lake City. D would be commitment that the RDA's obligation to pay the county the tax increment repayment amount is contingent on the developer's construction of Phase 2 of its West Quarter project on Block 67 as designed with underground parking.
That was good. That change in nomenclature from Block 67 North Project Area to West Quarter Project on Block 67 was suggested by RDA staff just to make sure that we weren't accidentally referring to the north end of the project when we're in fact talking about the south end of the project. So.
E would be clarification on the limitation of the RDA's participation, or the increment cap, and that the RDA is not obligated to reimburse any shortfall in the tax increment generated by developers Phase 1 of the Block 67 North project area, to be verified by the City Finance Director in consultation with the City RDA Director, and clarifying that the city portion of the increment is also not obligated to reimburse any shortfall that may occur. So this goes back to the question of the
15 million?
You said it all.
And just ensuring that we didn't inadvertently set up the city to be the one to be requested to make up that shortfall, since the city would be getting a portion of the tax increment. So.
F would be verification and oversight of construction cost estimates as they relate to the project gap and public benefits, and potential that RDA will have a construction oversight role in the development of the project area. And then finally, item 2 is Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City School District each have agreed to the terms and conditions of an interlocal agreement allocating a percentage of tax increment from the Block 67 North project area to the RDA for reinvestment in the Block 67 North project area. The RDA may also negotiate a percentage of tax increment from the Block 67 North project area from the Salt Lake City School District.
And in this case, it's sort of an either or. So either the green or the yellow. And if the board were to go with the green highlighted, that would essentially make the participation of the school district a requirement, that the CRA would not take effect unless all 3 of those taxing entities participated. If you removed the green highlight and just went with the yellow highlight, it leaves open the door that the project could go forward and then the RDA could negotiate school district participation, but it wouldn't be a condition of the CRA existing. So they just provided those 2 options for you guys to consider.
Charlie?
Do you want me to make a motion, Madam Chair?
Is there any discussion on the changes or concerns? I mean, I can't have a motion yet because we need to decide the wording on number 2.
Oh, yes. So I would say that before the motion, that we just go with the yellow and not the green.
Go with the yellow? Okay,
Yellow
so
it
there you
is.
go.
Okay. Make that change.
Yes, Cindy?
Just a quick comment. It's, we've all learned it's easy to accidentally offend other taxing entities when you're doing these agreements and things like that. And so I just want to be clear for the record that I think what the board is intending is to say that they really would hope that Salt Lake City School District and Salt Lake County and other taxing entities would be partners in this. And if they're not, then the city RDA would need to discuss this further. Is that correct?
I think you're right. That is the intent of the board. And I think this is in part to make sure that we're very clear with all the entities and the developers of what we can and want to do. We certainly, during our discussion, what I heard from the board during the discussion with Ryan and the RDA for the Block 67 is that we're certainly all very excited about this project and how new and innovative and different with several multi-uses on a block, but that we also have an obligation to our taxpayers and residents and our city to make sure that we're being fiscally aware of what's happening and not simply entering into something that could possibly harm us in the future. So I think this is our best way of moving forward and saying, yay, let's support a project, but we also need to make sure we're protecting our city and our residents, and that's our obligation as elected officials, right? And that we hope everybody is on board, and we want everyone to be on board, and if not, then we better make sure that we're covered, right? If I can get a thumbs up that that is accurate as to what everyone felt during our discussion, or not, Andrew. Okay, that's fair. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Cindy, for that clarification. With that, I move that the board adopt the CRA plan for the Block 67 North Community Reinvestment Area as revised during this meeting.
I have a motion by Board Member Luke and a second by Board Member Johnston. Is that who seconded? Any discussion? I think we've had enough. All those in favor? Aye. All right, there you go. Congratulations. I think, oh, we're still not done. Keep going, keep going. Back to my agenda. Thank you. We are now on item 8, which is the Clearwater Homes land sale proceeds for property at 550 North, 300 West. Danny and Cara?
Okay, sorry, I was just finding the right tab. I was still stuck on number 7. Okay, the purpose of this item is to really just have a preliminary discussion of how the original intention for this project was to utilize the proceeds from the land sale in anticipation of staff ultimately returning with a budget amendment to reflect this. A little background on the project in terms of this is another one of those projects and agreements and contracts that has been in place for several years. The intention at the time of executing this contract with the developer was that the agency would do certain components of the project in terms of infrastructure as well as assisting in the construction of the park itself. And so what you have with this discussion is really just formalizing what that intention has been. We, as an agency and working on this, did not incorporate these in the agreements at the time. And so as per our land disposition policy, the idea is that when we sell a property, those proceeds would go into a holding account, and then we would return back to the board with a budget amendment in terms of how to allocate and or dispose of those funds. And so as part of that property closing last week, and now those funds will be held in a holding account, we will return to the board with a request to allocate those funds for the construction of the park. Kara's been working on this project and has details in terms of the park construction and the costs and moving forward. But essentially, this is really just kind of to have that discussion with the board now so that when we return with it as part of a budget amendment, we can make sure we're addressing any issues at that time.
Can I ask a quick question? Does it have to be a park?
And as opposed to?
No, I was just curious if that's what
yeah, I mean, the idea for the overall development at the time was the park was to feed off of and complement the library that is built on the property. And that it would be the private development that would essentially provide the funding mechanism for that park.
Okay.
I just wanted to let council members know, if they weren't aware, that the community council got a briefing from Micah from Clearwater, and he indicated that one of the areas on the first floor of the development, they're looking to recruit for a small market.
Thank
So
you.
we may get a market and a park.
Thank you.
So I'm saying there's a chance. And I was previously told that a market would not be feasible there, but they're, I guess, going to look at it again.
Good. That's what I was getting at. So thanks for reading my mind.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Board Member Wharton, I appreciate that. I will probably lose a bet now because of that. So
that should teach you a lesson.
That should teach me a lesson.
Tara, did you need to add anything?
I don't think so. There are about $1.3 million in land sale proceeds that are in this holding account. So that's the amount that will come back and ask to be appropriated.
Okay. Is there anything else on this?
One second. Council member has just a statement to make. I don't think you need to recuse, but just put it into the record so that you are covered.
So as looking
Will
at
you
these new
pull your
project
microphone
areas,
on?
as I'm looking at these new project areas, I just realized that Square Kitchen, which is a property that I own on 751 West, 800 South, is within the 9-line project area. So I just wanted to disclose that. And I'll be here listening. All right.
Perfect.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, anything else on our Marmalade Park? Great, moving on to the next item. Do we have any reports from our executive director? I got a no from Mr. Litvack over there. Okey doke. Do we have reports and announcements from Danny?
Just two quick items, if I may, and I apologize, I'm going to read some of these so I can make sure I get some of the facts and details straight. First is just an update on the Technical Advisory Committee for the Fair Park Feasibility Study. Earlier this month, RDA staff working with the consultant facilitated the stakeholders meeting with various government and community organizations. The purpose of that meeting was to provide some background on other public markets in their various forms, and as well as how they operate in various locations. There's also a discussion in terms of identifying the strengths and weaknesses of around the two potential public market areas in the Fair Park. And it is proposed that the consultant is going to return in May for a second round with the Technical Advisory Committee. I think we also got some recommendations on other members to include in that stakeholder group, specifically as it relates to the meeting in May. And we're still hoping to complete that study in July of 2019. So that's the first item. Second is the Incremental Development Education Series, and I hope some of you have been pulled into that conversation and discussion that RDA is part of a host committee for a small-scale development education series that is run through the Incremental Development Alliance.
Sorry.
Time's up, huh? I don't know if I have to leave or make a toast one way or another. So we worked with them when they were here about a week ago and met with the Alliance to kind of look at how small-scale development could maybe be incorporated in some of our project areas. The goal behind all of this is to do a full-day training workshop April 24th at the Leonardo to kind of address how you can do kind of grassroots development in some of our project areas that provide great opportunities for that. So that is something that we should be notifying you all of and giving you some information if you want to either attend or turn people on to the event. So,
Anna?
Just for the record, and I think thank you so much for the work you've been doing. We've met with you guys and the companies that are doing the North Temple market study. Just a reiteration of of the stakeholders out there in the west side that we feel strongly that you need to connect and are invited are the businesses along North Temple and other businesses that might be interested in this market. And in the past, there was a lot done by the North Temple businesses when the URA was created. So those are very important groups that we ought to be talking to.
yes, agreed. Thank you. We will make sure the consultant is incorporating that. That is all we have, unless there are other questions.
Okay, 1 second. Not going to do that. And we should probably get in touch with her. Sorry, little change to the agenda. So next is a report from Chair, Vice Chair. Vice Chair, do you have anything to report?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I don't, thank you.
Okay. I just want to say today was a busy RDA day. Thanks everyone for hanging in there and getting through it. We got a lot done. It was a lot.
It was a great RDA day, great.
Everyone? Do you know, wasn't Emily here last time, but we didn't have her on the agenda?
You didn't have the formal approval on the agenda, and so that's the action this evening.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because we didn't notice it. So we have our consent items. I'm looking for a motion to approve our consent agenda. I have a motion by Board Member Luke and a second by Board Member James. Rogers, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, so there we go. I think that's everything. Strong work, team, strong work.
So, since you haven't formally adjourned,
Can we adjourn now?
so we'll reconvene as the city council in 10 minutes at 5 o'clock.
Perfect.
So.
Hot dog.